welcome back to a new YouTube video. If you're new here, then my name is Katie. I'm a full-time sketchbook artist, and in today's video I'm going to be using the Tim Holtz Distress Crayons. So a few weeks ago I shared a video on my channel all about them. You can see them here on the screen, but I'm also going to be using them alongside Stabilo Woody pencils and the Caran d'Ache Neocolor 2s today. But in the other video I shared quite a thorough in-depth review on how you can use them. So here's a close-up. I've got the set 10 and the set 8 here. But if you want to see how they work, how they layer and blend, and how they compare, then I definitely recommend that video, so I'll leave that linked up in the cards and down below in the description. But here's the spread I created from there, and here's some colour swatches, because they are water soluble, so you can use them both wet and dry. So when I was editing that video, I did think it would be useful if I could show you how I use them with art. So that video is very much about swatching and blending tests and how they work on their own, but I also wanted to show how we can use them in art. So I thought that could be a follow-up video, and I had lots of comments agreeing, so that's what this video is about today. It's kind of like a part 2 of that one, so if you haven't seen that one and you're interested in learning more about these distress crayons, I definitely recommend starting there. I also had a few comments asking how they work with the Stabilo Woodies, which I've done a whole video on as well. Again, I'll link that up in the cards. I've done one on Neocolors too, so there's quite a lot of knowledge in my channel about these mediums separately. But today I'm going to be using them all together, because they are all water soluble, but they do have varying light fastness. So the Distress Crayons definitely don't, but you can see that they are much, much softer. So I'm going to be using them dry and wet in today's art. I'm starting by placing down my basic colours, and then I'll smudge them in, and then I'll come in with water, but I really wanted to play with the variety of techniques that you can use with these. I really like how soft they are, but I am a little bit wary that they might wear down quite quickly. A lot of you quite rightly pointed out that they do have a lot of plastic, which is not great, and if they could come out with refills, I think that would be really, really good. But I don't know how far down the plastic barrels the pigment comes, so that will be interesting, and I'll keep you updated. But I definitely feel like the colour payoff is pretty good, and I really like their versatility. So I'm coming in here with a round brush just to soften it out, and you can see it kind of turns it into paint. I also wanted to do it with the water down first and then going on top and smudging that out, and that creates a really nice effect, but you can still see the original marks below. I think if I was to put down more and really smudge it out with my fingers, you wouldn't see that. But it's a really nice way to use them, and I do really like that you can get a little bit messy with them. So you can come in with your finger and soften up any marks, or you can come in with just them on their own. But I do find that they probably work better with water, because then you don't need to seal them. They go down quite sticky and tacky. So that's one thing that I don't necessarily notice quite as much with Neocolors. So I'm going to be coming in with those a little bit later. You can see here where I just picked up some pigment on the brush to create that sort of painty effect of the mountains in the distance. So you can also put these onto like a paint palette and then smush them on there and then pick that up with your paintbrush. Or you can do what I'm doing, where I'm really trying to focus on the texture and using my colours to create this sort of autumnal landscape. So I probably should have mentioned that already, but I am using a reference for this. I will leave a link down below to the reference, which is from Castell, which is a copyright-free image site, and I really love the colours of these. I thought it suited the two sets that I have really, really well. Because I do love painting landscapes, that's why I picked the set 8 and the set 10, and I'm really happy with them. I think it works really well for landscapes, as you can see in this image, and I really like the muted colours too. So there are plenty of other shades, and I think one of the pros of these distress crayons is that they do come in some really lovely colours. I prefer the muted ones, which I can't get with the Stabilo Woodies. So for me, those are a little bit too bright, and I don't reach for them as often as I'd like. But then the Neocolor 2s, obviously there's a huge wide range of colours there, which I really like as well. But if you want a set of them, you generally have to buy the brighter, sort of more vivid colours as well, and I've built up my collection of the more muted colours individually. Whereas with the distress crayons you can buy the different sets, and I think that works really nicely. So these sets are definitely my favourites. I haven't got any others. I might buy some more in the future, but for now these are plenty for me, and I really like the contrast here as well. So you can see this one's going down over slightly wet paper, and I'm smudging it out with my finger, and I can do that because of the water underneath. And I'm drawing this on the very first spread on my new Strathmore Mixed Media sketchbook. If you watched last week's video, you'll know that I highly recommend this sketchbook, and I'm really happy to be finally breaking this one in to create today's art. Some of you did mention that your spine on your Strathmores are really quite hard, and that was the same with mine too, and it's the same with this one, but it does soften out with time. So obviously I'd finished that other one that I showed you, so it's laid a lot flatter, and this one was a lot harder, so I weighed it down with the clip on the left, and it's still very stiff. So the more you work in them and the more you obviously create, then the easier and the softer the spine will get. So don't worry if that's the same with yours, they all start out like that, that's totally normal. So again, I'm playing with water here. I've put down my marks and I'm just trying to pick up some of that pigment with the water. I couldn't quite get to the spine when I was using them dry, so I used the paintbrush to help that. And then here I'm going over the purple, and it's not mixing with that because I let the purple sit for a while. You can see it really creates that sort of painty texture, which I really like, and I like that it didn't blend in too much with the purple. And then I can come over later on if I want to enhance that purple a little bit more, but it didn't create a muddy brown because I let that set for a little bit. The quicker you work on top of these, the easier it is to smudge out those initial marks or to pick up that colour. As I mentioned, these aren't light fast, but I think they're fine for sketchbook work. But if you're doing like commissions and things, then the Neocolor 2 would be a better bet because they are. So I'm starting to put in the tree here. There's one on the left and on the right, and I'm using my Distress Crayons at first. You can see the colours don't necessarily match up to the lid, so that's something to think about when you are choosing your colours. But I'm also going to come in with some Neocolors and some Stabilo woodies. Mostly because I want to have that colour variation. I wanted a nice orange and a nice yellow, so I use my woodies and my Neocolors for that, because I don't necessarily want to buy another set of the Distress Crayons just for one colour. So it's really nice that I can use these together. Here you can see that brown coming in, and where the paper is already soft with the water, it comes out really pigmented, and I really like using these. Obviously they are very, very thick, so you can't get quite as defined lines, but you'll see later on, both with the Neocolors and the Distress Crayons, you can still get quite thin lines, so I was quite impressed with that, and I think it's easier with those than it is with the woodies. So here I am using more Neocolor to create more texture and contrast in my landscape. I really wanted to have that softer sort of autumnal pinks and oranges as well, so that's why I was trying to add those in alongside the greens. Here I'm using the Neocolor, and you can see there it's not quite going over that Distress Crayon, so it's just struggling a little bit with that sort of apricot colour. Whereas when I come over with the Distress Crayon, because it's so much softer, it goes over there no problem. So some of these don't layer as well over each other, but all together they do work very similarly. I really liked using them together. They worked perfectly. Obviously they are all water soluble, so I didn't have to worry about that. If you have the woodies, you'll definitely find that they work well with the Distress Crayons, but they are obviously very different because the woodies are so much harder, and they are actually children's art supplies, so not necessarily made for professional artists, but you can use them interchangeably, and I really love the experimentation and the versatility of our art supplies, and that we can use these different things in so many different ways and still create art that we love to create. So I'm just softening up some of these marks here. I'm picking up some pigment from the tree trunk to then add in some tinier details with my brush, and then I'm just going to go all around the image and start to add in a bit more contrast. I really liked how dark this was, this darker green Distress Crayon. I really love how smushy it is, so compared to how hard the woodies are, for example. Now I'm coming onto the gate, so you can see the pencil there struggled over the, I think that's a woody I put down, but on the dried Distress Crayon it didn't have any issues. So I think pencils work better over the top when it has been watered down, but when it's just the pure pigment it does struggle. So just adding on this little detail here, and I think this really helps to make things feel a little bit more refined. Again, I'm using my coloured pencils. These are the Caran d'Ache Luminance. I'll leave a link to all the materials I'm using down below. And here you can see I can get quite a thin line with the Distress Crayons just by using the edge of it. So obviously if I wanted these marks to be a little bit softer, I could either use them at like a 90-degree angle to the paper, or I can smudge them out with my finger. And I can get a little bit of line work with the woody, which you can see here, but it's not quite as precise. So I've added in these little marks for the grass, and I think that really helped me love this picture a little bit more, because so far it was feeling a little bit rough and messy. And just this smaller mark making made a really big difference, and I think that's because you got that balance. So where it was quite messy and loose beforehand, just having these smaller marks made it feel a lot more intentional. So I really liked adding that, and now I'm coming in again with some more softness. just to balance that texture, but that's something to think about if you're feeling like things are a little bit messy. Try and be a little bit more precise with your marks and do some smaller ones, and it can really help to bring the image into a more finished state. So I'm adding on some little Neocolor details with the trees in the background, and again coming in with my pencils where it is a little bit thicker from the Distress Crayons and the pencil isn't going over it. I'll use Distress Crayons over that because they do layer on top really nicely, and then softening it out with my finger again. I really like the contrast of the oranges and the greens, and then I used the layering to my advantage, so where the pencil wouldn't go over and the Distress Crayon hadn't dried yet, it kind of scratches in some details. So I really liked that, and that was fun to do. It was an accident just because I didn't wait long enough for it to dry, but I like that. I think that's what art is all about, just playing around with your supplies and having fun with it. And I definitely did that with this spread. So as I said with the gate and the little grass marks, adding in these smaller marks helps too. So I'm adding that in the background and adding some little trees in the distance, and also this little house. So I just use a white Derwent drawing pencil there and adding on some dark indigo lines as well, and some tiny little windows, which is quite a small little feature, but I really liked having this there. I didn't plan on putting this and it wasn't there in the original reference, but I like it. I really like having these tiny little details that you only necessarily spot when you're properly looking at the artwork and you wouldn't see at first glance. So I'm just adding in a few little lines here and there, again to try and distinguish the hills in the distance, instead of it just being one blob of colour. I think having these lines really help to add a lot of movement as well back there. And then the blobs of purple I have in the foreground, that was kind of like floral, like lavender. That was my idea. Again, not in the reference, but I really wanted to use the purple from the Distress Crayon, so that really influenced it. It's nice to have those sort of set colour palettes to work with, and I really think this helps to add in a bit more of a pop of colour into the reference image, even if it doesn't necessarily make sense for these to be here. So I'm layering the Neocolor on top because the Distress Crayon's nice and dry now. That worked really nicely, and I really love this sky blue colour. It's a lovely sort of periwinkle lilac-y blue. And then I'm also popping that around the landscape, so just to highlight some of the hills again, which I used to do quite a lot in my work. I haven't done it as often as I used to, but it just helps to highlight little areas. And then I'm coming in with a light cobalt blue Neocolor to colour the sky. So the blue that I had in the Distress Crayon set wasn't the right blue. I wanted it to be like a really clean and fresh sky with some clouds, but I really had in mind using this light cobalt blue. So that's why I used that instead of the blue in the Stabilo Woodies or the Distress Crayons. And again, I'm just softening that up with water with my brush. And I'm not trying to get all of the marks up. I still want quite a lot of texture in the sky because I think that adds a lot of interest. But I really like the way this works. I think that really finished off the landscape nicely just by having that really clean blue in the sky compared to all that colour in the landscape. And then lastly, I'm just adding a little location tag just from the information from the Castell's website and then dating it too. So I really hope you've enjoyed this one. I hope it's been helpful to see how I use this in my actual art and how I combine my mediums and use water-soluble supplies to paint a landscape. If you have any questions, do let me know in the comments if you've got them yourself. Let me know how you use them, whether you prefer them dry or wet, and I hope you've enjoyed this one. A big thank you to my patrons for allowing me to create these videos. Without their support, I wouldn't be able to do free videos on YouTube every week, and thank you for watching. I will see you next Sunday in my new YouTube video. See you later!